She did everything right. For 12 years, she followed every piece of fitness advice religiously. Clean eating, daily workouts, calorie counting, supplement stacks. Yet her body remained trapped in a cycle of frustration. The mirror reflected a cruel truth: persistent bloating, stubborn belly fat, muscles hidden beneath layers that seemed impossible to shed. How could this be happening when every food choice was calculated, every workout was a battle won? The answer was hiding in plain sight, buried within the very industry that promised to save her. 5 habits, considered sacred in the fitness world, were secretly sabotaging her metabolism, rewiring her brain to store fat, and keeping her body locked in survival mode. These weren't just mistakes, they were systematic sabotage disguised as health advice. The first saboteur crept into her life through the cardio obsession that consumed her mornings. Hour after hour on the treadmill, believing that more cardio meant more fat burn. Society had programmed her to think that suffering equaled results. But her body was interpreting this daily torture as a constant threat. Every step on that machine was sending distress signals through her nervous system. Cortisol flooded her bloodstream like a toxic river, and her metabolism began to shut down in self-defense. Her body wasn't burning fat, it was desperately trying to preserve it for the next perceived emergency. The cruel irony was that the more cardio she did, the more her body fought to keep every ounce of fat as protection against this relentless stress. Her adrenal glands were screaming for mercy, pumping out stress hormones that blocked fat oxidation and triggered inflammatory responses throughout her tissues. The chronic elevation of cortisol was literally rewiring her brain's hunger signals, making her crave high-calorie foods even when she thought she had willpower. Each cardio session was programming her body deeper into fat storage mode, creating a metabolic prison that felt impossible to escape. The second saboteur was even more insidious because it felt like control. Extreme caloric restriction became her religion, eating less than 1,200 calories per day while believing she was taking charge of her destiny. But she was actually programming her body for scarcity, teaching every cell to function in famine mode. Her metabolism didn't just slow down, it fundamentally changed its operating system. Her thyroid hormones plummeted, her body temperature dropped, and her cellular machinery shifted into conservation mode. This metabolic adaptation was her body's ancient survival mechanism kicking in, designed to keep her alive during times of genuine starvation. But her body couldn't distinguish between voluntary calorie restriction and actual famine. Every meal became a negotiation with a metabolism that had learned to extract maximum energy from minimal input. When she eventually ate normal amounts, her body treated every extra calorie as a windfall to be stored immediately as fat reserves. The binge-restrict cycle wasn't a failure of willpower, it was her biology desperately trying to restore balance against the artificial scarcity she had imposed. Her leptin sensitivity was completely destroyed, meaning her brain could no longer accurately read her body's fat stores. She was trapped in a hormonal feedback loop where her body constantly signaled hunger even when she had adequate fat reserves. The metabolic damage went deeper than just slow weight loss, her body was fundamentally rewiring itself to survive in what it perceived as a hostile, food-scarce environment. The third saboteur came disguised as progress, wrapped in marketing promises of guilt-free indulgence. Diet foods, sugar-free products, low-fat alternatives filled her shopping cart like false prophets of health. She believed she was making smart choices, but she was actually consuming a cocktail of chemicals that her body didn't recognize as real food. Artificial sweeteners were hijacking her brain's reward pathways, creating cravings that no amount of willpower could satisfy. These synthetic compounds were confusing her insulin response, making her body prepare for sugar that never came, leaving her in a constant state of metabolic confusion. The preservatives and artificial ingredients were triggering low-grade inflammation throughout her digestive system, compromising her gut bacteria and disrupting the delicate ecosystem that regulated her mood, immunity, and metabolism. Her intestinal lining was becoming permeable, allowing toxins to leak into her bloodstream and triggering autoimmune responses that further slowed her metabolism. The irony was devastating: foods marketed as healthy were actually poisoning her system at a cellular level. Her liver was working overtime to process these foreign chemicals, diverting energy away from fat metabolism and detoxification. Each diet product was like a small act of biochemical warfare against her own biology, creating inflammation that made fat loss nearly impossible while simultaneously triggering cravings for real food that her body desperately needed. The fourth saboteur was the comfort of routine that had become a metabolic death trap. The same exercises, same intensity, same duration, day after day, month after month. Her body had completely adapted to this predictable pattern, entering a state of mechanical autopilot where energy expenditure was minimized. What started as challenging workouts had become metabolically meaningless movements that barely elevated her heart rate or challenged her muscles. Her nervous system had mapped every movement pattern, optimizing efficiency to the point where she was burning fewer calories doing the same workout that once left her exhausted. Muscle confusion wasn't just a fitness buzzword, it was a biological necessity for continued adaptation. Without progressive overload or varied stimuli, her muscles had no reason to grow or change, and her metabolism had no reason to increase its energy demands. The psychological trap was even deeper than the physical one. The routine had become a security blanket, a way to feel productive without actually producing results. She was addicted to the process rather than focused on the outcome, trapped in a cycle of busy work that felt like progress but delivered stagnation. Her workouts had become a form of meditation that soothed her anxiety about not seeing results, creating a feedback loop where the very thing that should have been changing her body was actually preventing change. The fifth and most devastating saboteur was the one she couldn't see, the chronic sleep deprivation and stress that were silently destroying her from within. 5 hours of sleep per night had become her norm, worn like a badge of honor in a culture that celebrated exhaustion. But those missing hours of sleep were costing her everything she was working toward. During deep sleep, her body was supposed to release growth hormone, repair muscle tissue, and optimize fat metabolism. Instead, she was living in a constant state of partial recovery, never allowing her body to complete its natural restoration processes. The sleep debt was accumulating like compound interest, creating a hormonal disaster that made fat loss nearly impossible. Her ghrelin levels were chronically elevated, making her constantly hungry, while her leptin production was suppressed, preventing her brain from recognizing when she was full. The combination created an insatiable appetite that no amount of willpower could overcome. She was fighting a biological battle with psychological weapons, and her biology was winning every time. Chronic stress was the accelerant that made everything worse. Work pressure, relationship tension, financial worry, and the stress of not seeing results from her fitness efforts created a perfect storm of cortisol production. This stress hormone was literally reshaping her body composition, preferentially storing fat around her midsection while breaking down lean muscle tissue for energy. The stress was also disrupting her insulin sensitivity, making her body more likely to store carbohydrates as fat rather than use them for energy. The cruel irony was that her efforts to get healthy were actually creating more stress, which was preventing the very results she was working so hard to achieve. Each failed attempt at transformation added another layer of psychological stress, creating a downward spiral where the harder she tried, the further she moved from her goals. Her nervous system was stuck in sympathetic overdrive, making rest and recovery impossible even when she tried to relax. But the most insidious aspect of this sabotage was how it affected her relationship with her own body. Years of following advice that didn't work had eroded her trust in her own instincts. She had learned to ignore hunger cues, push through pain signals, and override fatigue warnings. Her body was constantly sending messages that something was wrong, but she had been conditioned to interpret these signals as weakness rather than wisdom. The disconnect between her conscious goals and her body's needs created an internal war that consumed enormous amounts of mental and physical energy. She was living in a state of constant vigilance, monitoring every bite of food, every missed workout, every fluctuation on the scale. This hypervigilance was actually triggering stress responses that made fat storage more likely, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where her fear of gaining weight was literally causing weight gain. The breakthrough came when she finally understood that her body wasn't broken or stubborn, it was actually responding perfectly to the signals she was unknowingly sending. Every extreme diet was teaching her metabolism to slow down. Every excessive cardio session was programming her body to store fat. Every night of poor sleep was disrupting the hormonal symphony that orchestrated fat loss. Her body wasn't failing her, she was inadvertently sabotaging it with habits disguised as health. This realization was both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it meant years of effort had been counterproductive. Liberating because it meant the solution wasn't about trying harder, it was about trying differently. The problem wasn't her willpower, genetics, or metabolism. The problem was that she had been following advice designed to sell products rather than produce results. The fitness industry had profited from her confusion, selling her solutions to problems they had created. The supplement companies needed her to believe that fat loss required expensive pills. The gym industry needed her to believe that results required expensive memberships. The diet food industry needed her to believe that healthy eating required processed products. Each industry had a vested interest in keeping her trapped in cycles of temporary progress followed by inevitable regression. When she finally stepped back and looked at the bigger picture, she saw the pattern clearly. Every mainstream fitness recommendation was designed to create dependency rather than independence. The advice wasn't meant to solve her problem permanently, it was meant to keep her coming back for more advice, more products, more programs. She had been caught in a web of well-meaning but misguided information that prioritized profit over her actual health and happiness. The real transformation began when she stopped fighting against her body and started working with her biology. She discovered that sustainable fat loss wasn't about punishment and deprivation, it was about nourishment and restoration. Instead of forcing her body to change through extreme measures, she learned to create conditions where change happened naturally and effortlessly. She realized that her body wanted to be lean and healthy just as much as she did. The excess fat wasn't a sign of laziness or lack of discipline, it was a symptom of a system that was out of balance. When she addressed the root causes rather than just the symptoms, everything began to shift. Her energy returned, her cravings normalized, her sleep improved, and her body began to release the fat it had been desperately holding onto for protection. The most profound change wasn't physical, it was psychological. She learned to trust her body's wisdom again, to listen to its signals rather than override them. She discovered that sustainable transformation required patience, consistency, and self-compassion rather than force, extremes, and self-punishment. The relationship with her body shifted from adversarial to collaborative, and that shift made all the difference. If you recognize yourself in this story of hidden sabotage, know that you're not alone and you're not broken. Your body isn't being stubborn or difficult, it's responding logically to the inputs you're giving it. The solution isn't about finding more willpower or trying harder. It's about understanding how your body actually works and giving it what it needs to thrive. There is a way forward that honors your biology rather than fights against it, that creates lasting change rather than temporary fixes. Your transformation is waiting on the other side of this understanding.